Mm. Live, making babies, cooking them up, putting them in the oven. Not sure why not going live. Oh wait, that is it. Should going live. Okay. Welcome to the Black Sun Empire. So it's making me have to like broadcast, and then I have to cancel the broadcast and go live, so it doesn't go through. Yeah. Always time to buy more. That's pretty cool. You get locked in here in a second. So cute.
This is the single greatest explanation of Jeffrey Epstein on the entire internet.
The crypto exchange, rated #1 by Forbes, is rewarding new deposits with a 3% match. Enroll, deposit, and get rewarded.
Ladies and gentlemen, President Trump has just pulled off what is perhaps the single most ingenious political maneuver of all time. And this time, as it would seem, some of the far-left justices currently sitting on the U.S. Supreme Court have just walked into President Trump's trap. Now, folks, frankly, this is a very complex situation, so we're going to break all of this down today, step by step, so everyone really understands what has gone on here. But I'm not joking when I say this. President Trump has pretty much just played these far-left justices on the Supreme Court like a fiddle. So let's get right into this. Ladies and gentlemen, here's the big breaking news of the day. A couple hours ago, earlier this morning, in a 6-3 vote, the Supreme Court struck down President Trump's IEEPA trade tariffs, saying that President Trump cannot use the IEEPA to mandate these sort of tariffs. Okay, well, what does that mean? The IEEPA stands for the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. And it was through this act's legal framework that President Trump, starting back in April of 2025, Liberation Day, as he called it, it's through this IEEPA framework that President Trump has applied roughly 70% of his tariffs over the last year or so. The other 30% of his tariffs, however, his most important tariffs. Tariffs on steel, aluminum, copper, lumber, automobile, and industrial manufacturing components. These more important tariffs were filed through a different legal framework through a series of other congressionally passed acts. And the reason why Trump led these very important tariffs through a different legal framework is because these are in our nation's best national security interests, and they are. So he used a different legal framework. And I say this, I explain this dynamic here because it is actually very important to what is going on today. Take a look at this. Today's Supreme Court ruling is actually relatively narrow. What it does is it strikes down tariffs, President Trump's tariffs that have been imposed under this IEEPA.
God damn it.
It does not mention whether or not these former IEEPA tariffs can be under these alternative legal frameworks that President Trump has already been using for the other 30% of his tariffs. So right now, what seems to be the case is that Trump, he's not allowed to use the IEEPA for these 70% of his tariffs, but now he can just remotely apply all of them immediately under a different, more robust legal framework. That seems to be what's happening here. Now, here's the deal. These other legal frameworks that Trump can use to re-implement his tariffs, well, they are literally they've already been litigated in the lower courts as well as in the past in the Supreme Court hundreds, thousands of times over the last couple decades. All President Trump has to do in order to work through these legal frameworks to apply these tariffs is to determine that a foreign import that Trump wants to place a tariff on poses a national security threat in some way and motivating. He can then impose a tariff on it through this more robust legal framework. For instance here, let's give an example. If President Trump determines that importing medical equipment from China, for instance, is a national security concern, then he is legally able to slap a tariff on Chinese medical equipment. And so, when you stop and really think about this, if that's the right reason to apply these tariffs under this different, more robust, national security-based legal framework, well, he can kind of do whatever he wants. The reason I say that is because of this. In some shape or form, you can make an argument that every single foreign import could be considered a national security concern. If our country is dependent on foreign imports to continue operating as a country, that's obviously a big problem. That's a foreign security or national security concern. And also, foreign imports have some impact. If we import, maybe the less domestic manufacturing we have. That's also a national security threat or a national security concern at a minimum. And so with all of that being said, this is where we can talk about President Trump's response to this morning's Supreme Court decision. This is where the video gets crazy. You'll really like this. President Trump, in addition to a bunch of other things, President Trump said this here is what has the country going crazy. Take a look at this. In response to the Supreme Court ruling, President Trump said, therefore, effective immediately, all national security tariffs, Section 232 and existing Section 301 tariffs, remain in place in full force and effect. Today, I will sign an executive order to impose a % global tariff on the entire globe under Section 122 over and above our normal tariffs already being charged. And we are also initiating several Section 301 and other investigations to protect our country from unfair trading practices. Thank you for your attention to this matter. So, ladies and gentlemen, President Trump, let's be clear about this. President Trump is not only maintaining literally all of his former IEEPA tariffs under a new, more robust legal framework, he's also maintaining all of his other non-IEEPA trade tariffs. They're going to remain in effect as well, but also now he's bringing forth a brand new 10% tariff on the entire globe. Personally, I'm calling this the FAFO tariff. Trump had potentially some far-left subversives, maybe even globalists, foreign influence perhaps, attempts to undermine his capacity to leverage tariffs as the president. President Trump said, well, we're just going to pivot all of our tariffs into a new legal framework. You can't do anything about it. And also, as a punishment, 10% global tariff, you're going to have to deal with it. They fog, and then they vote. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent actually chimed in on all of this. Crazy situation. Just a couple hours ago, take a listen to what he had to say.
I'd also like to take a moment to address today's Supreme Court ruling. I would note that I did not change a single word in my speech. They opposed the ruling. President Trump will always be our national security first. And as I have said before, the president has multiple tools in his toolbox. Let's be clear about what today's ruling was and what it wasn't. Despite the misplaced voting from Democrats, ill-informed media outlets, and the very people who gutted our industrial base, the court did not rule against President Trump's tariffs. 6 justices simply ruled that IEPA authorities cannot be used to raise even $1 of revenue. This administration will invoke alternative legal authorities to replace the IEPA tariffs. We will be leveraging Section 232 and Section 301 tariff authorities that have been validated through thousands of legal challenges. Treasury's estimates show that the use of Section 122 authority combined with potentially enhanced Section 232 and Section 301 tariffs will result in virtually unchanged tariff revenue in 2026.
I spent everything on Netflix, and now my $340 car insurance bill just hit. I'm screwed.
You're not screwed, right? You're right. Yeah, it's
26.
So, folks, there you have it. The tariff revenue going forward, in spite of this Supreme Court ruling, is going to remain absolutely unchanged. The projections haven't even budged. But also, now, President Trump's tariff policy has effectively been concretely, legally solidified. Now, so no one can do anything about it. The globalists, the far left, the Democrats, there is not a thing they can do, which is bad news for all of these radically progressive federal judges that have been, over the last 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 months, been trying to undermine President Trump's tariffs on a daily basis. Bad news, you can't do it anymore. But okay, moving on. Speaking of federal judges, what do you say we take a look at which Supreme Court justices voted in favor of Trump's IEEPA tariffs and which ones did not? Well, we have the names, we've got the faces. How the U.S. Supreme Court voted on Trump's tariffs earlier this morning. Alito, Kavanaugh, and Thomas voted in favor of Trump's IEEPA tariffs. We call these 3 individuals patriots. That's what I call them. Then you have the opposite. These 6 Supreme Court justices, Roberts, Sotomayor, Kagan, Gorsuch, Barrett, and Jackson, voted against President Trump's capacity to leverage IEEPA trade tariffs, which is fine. Trump has a way to navigate around this. In fact, the new way seems even better. This is all part of President Trump's plan, but still, we've got some traitors amongst us, seems to be the case. Now, here's the curious thing. In fact, I'm going to put this up so you guys have a really proper visual. Here's the curious thing about the way that some of these conservative justices voted earlier today. Really, when you think about it, they pretty much betrayed the American people and sided with a bunch of multinational foreign entities or foreign nations altogether. Why would they do that? Well, this is where I'm going to introduce some very curious information. President Trump himself said something earlier today at this morning's press conference that has sent shockwaves across the entire country. Ladies and gentlemen, take a look at this.
Multiple times, foreign influence over the Supreme Court. Do you have evidence of that? And if not, will you investigate that?
Let's find out. So, folks, yes, you just heard that right. That was President Trump speaking directly and openly. He accused several Supreme Court justices of being under foreign control. The President of the United States this morning, once again, accused Supreme Court justices of being under foreign control. And then, when he was asked about it by a member of the media, he said, well, you're going to find out. You're going to find out very soon, is what he said. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a massive allegation. Like I said, this has sent shockwaves through the country. Everybody's talking about this right now. And it seems as if President Trump, in fact, has some evidence to prove this allegation that soon he's going to be sharing with all of us. Now, keep in mind here, put this up on the big screen, just 4 days from now, on February 24th, it's a Tuesday, I believe, President Trump is going to be delivering the State of the Union National Address. And we've already been hearing rumors that during this speech, during the State of the Union, President Trump is going to get up there in front of the country. The entire world will be watching this address. And that Trump is going to blow the whistle on foreign interference in the 2020 election. We all know that Trump has been talking a lot about that. We all know that it seems as if he has proof of that as well. And so, personally, when President Trump just hours ago talks about Supreme Court justices succumbing to foreign influence as well, I can't help but wonder if President Trump is also planning on exposing some of our Supreme Court justices at the State of the Union address in 4 days, alongside blowing a whistle on the 2020 election. Time will tell. Time will tell. But I'll tell you what, we've got to expose these people and all of their secrets, their anti-American behavior, if we really do want to put America first.
Take your fine after a car accident. This happens. Most people don't realize this. Minor can financially destroy you and cause illness later. If you've been in a car accident, even one that seemed minor, where you were just a passenger, you need to hear this before.
Stevenson and Ryan, you do talk well. You know, the first version of almost every major technology rarely becomes the one that defines the future. Not because it failed or it wasn't revolutionary, but because invention and dominance are two different phases. The first version proves something is possible. The version that wins learns how to scale it. And if you understand that pattern, you'll start looking at crypto and Bitcoin specifically very differently. Now, first, I just want to say this is not financial advice. I'm just sharing how I think about technological cycles and market structure. I want you to do your own research. This is only for educational purposes. And if this kind of breakdown helps you to think more clearly, go ahead and like the video and go ahead and subscribe if you haven't, so you do not miss a video, and drop a comment. I would love to know your favorite cryptocurrency. Now, let's walk through this. When the internet first appeared, it wasn't Google that defined it. It wasn't Amazon. It wasn't even the platforms most people use today. Early browsers existed before the dominant one. Early search engines existed before the ones that scaled. Early social platforms exploded before they faded. The first iteration opens the door. It shows the world what is possible. But the dominant version is usually the one that removes friction. It makes adoption easier. It integrates with existing systems. It scales under pressure. It solves the problems the first version revealed. And once you see that pattern historically, you can't unsee what you see. Now, apply that lens to digital assets. Bitcoin was the breakthrough. It introduced the idea that digital scarcity could exist without a central issue. It forced the world to take decentralized networks seriously. It shifted the psychological barrier around what money could be. And that matters a whole lot. But being first and being final are not the same thing. Bitcoin's design reflects 2008 thinking. It was built to solve a specific problem in a specific moment, which is distrust in centralized finance after a global crisis. Its architecture prioritized security and immutability over flexibility. Its narrative evolved over time, moving from peer-to-peer electronic cash to digital gold and store of value. That evolution wasn't random, it was adaptive. But adaptation is a signal that a technology is still finding its long-term role, and that's normal. The first version of something usually exposes both the opportunity and the limitations. It reveals what works and what creates friction. It draws attention, attracts capital, and builds the first wave of belief. Then the refinement phase begins. In crypto, refinement looks different than invention. It's no longer just about proving decentralization is possible. It's about interoperability. It's about compliance layers. It's about integration with legacy systems. It's about tokenizing real-world assets. It's about building rails that large institutions can actually plug into without dismantling the entire infrastructure. That's a very different challenge than launching the first project. And that's why the question isn't whether Bitcoin was revolutionary. It clearly was. It's whether the asset that started the movement will also be the one that defines its maturity. History suggests that the answer to that question is rarely automatic. Now here's where this becomes more practical. When a technology moves from invention to refinement, capital behaves differently. Early capital chases possibility. Later capital allocates towards efficiency. And crypto is slowly moving into that second phase. Now let's talk about what that refinement actually looks like inside this market. When refinement begins, the focus shifts from ideology to integration. Invention attracts attention. Refinement attracts infrastructure. The early phase of crypto, again, was about proving decentralization works, about censorship resistance, sovereignty, and narrative momentum. That phase needed conviction more than coordination. But refinement requires something very different. It requires systems that can plug into existing financial architecture. It requires assets that can interact with banks, regulators, clearinghouses, and legacy databases without forcing them to tear everything down and start over. That's a harder problem because legacy systems are not going away. Governments are not going away. Compliance is not going away. Real-world assets still need to be issued, tracked, audited, and settled inside legal frameworks. So the refinement phase asks different questions. Not payments exist without banks, but integrate with them. It's decentralized, but it can scale without breaking coordination. That's where interoperability becomes critical. That's where tokenization becomes practical, and that's where settlement layers matter more than narratives. Less as alternatives to the financial system and more as connectivity inside of them, right? That's a completely different stage of maturity. And when you zoom out, you can see it happening. You can see regulatory frameworks forming. You can see ETF structures normalizing exposure. You see conversations around tokenized treasuries, real-world assets, digital bonds. You see central banks experimenting with digital infrastructure. And you see interoperability discussions accelerating. That's refinement. It doesn't look dramatic. It looks procedural. But procedural shifts are often the ones that last. This is where the life cycle changes. Ones that last. This is where the life cycle changes. The early phase rewards conviction. The refinement phase rewards alignment. And alignment favors technologies that reduce friction rather than amplify ideology. That's why the future of this market won't be decided by who was first. It will be influenced by who fits best into the system that's emerging. Now, here's where it gets even more relevant, because when a market moves from invention to refinement, capital starts looking for different things. It's not wondering about what's going to explode, but it's wondering what's built to last. Let's talk about where we are in that shift right now. Right now, crypto is sitting in between phases. It's no longer a fringe experiment. Institutions are involved. Regulators are involved. Public companies hold digital assets on their balance sheets. Retirement accounts can now access exposure. Governments are studying tokenization, and central banks are experimenting with digital frameworks. That's not the invention stage anymore at all. But it's also not fully refined. Speculation still dominates value. Narratives still move markets. Liquidity still rotates through the same gravitational centers. Most capital still behaves as if this is a momentum trade rather than a structural shift. That's what transition looks like.
You have infrastructure quietly being built in the background while speculation remains loud in the foreground. You have interoperability discussions happening at the same time Bitcoin's trading. You have tokenized treasury experiments running alongside leverage-driven rallies. Those two worlds coexist for a while, but they don't stay equally weighted forever. Over time, capital that cares about longevity starts allocating differently than capital chasing velocity. And that's when separation happens. Not sudden or dramatic, but just gradual reweighting. The early stage rewards belief, but the mature stage rewards integration. And when integration becomes the priority, the assets that align with institutional coordination tend to outlast the ones built purely on narrative. Now, that doesn't mean Bitcoin disappears, and it doesn't mean early innovators lose relevance overnight. It means the ecosystem expands beyond its origin story. And in that expansion, some technologies will prove more adaptable to the real world constraints of compliance, scale, and cross-border coordination. Now, once you recognize that we're in this transitional window, then the outlook starts to change. It's no longer about timing the next cycle. It's about structuring exposure intelligently while the market matures. For me, that is why I am making moves that are structural, because structure matters. Same thing with taxes. Tax structure matter. Everything concerning how you structure your finances in this economy is going to matter. And this is why I do personally use I Trust Capital for that reason. One way I use it is through a Roth IRA. If digital assets compound over the next decade and things appreciate, I do not want taxes eating my profits. And so being able to trade within a tax advantage structure is going to change the long-term outcome. In my Roth IRA, I have a lot of cryptocurrencies. XRP, LM, maybe not Bitcoin. The second way I use it is through the premium custody account. So it allows assets to be held on the exchanges in a closed custody model, which reduces exchange risk while still allowing flexibility. You can trade 24/7 there on crypto stable coins and get yield. You can stake assets and get yield, and even hold gold and silver in the same platform. I love that. If you've been sitting on an old 401k or a retirement account that isn't positioned for this asset class, their rollover options do exist, and that's something most people don't even consider. And so I am going to leave the link below. If you open and fund an account, we'll get $100 free funding bonus to you. If you have more questions about it, the customer service is incredible. So just reach out to them if you have any questions. Now, if you are trying to think more clearly about the cycles and the structure and positioning, then
Трамп в ответ на блокировку Telegram в России решил помочь мне создать платформу для заработка.
Welcome back. U.S. lawmakers ramping up efforts to advance the stalled Clarity Act aimed at bringing regulatory certainty to crypto markets. The bill facing a Senate standoff over stablecoin reward rules, whether crypto players can pay rewards for customers moving money from traditional banks to the crypto platforms. The White House stepping in to broker a deal, setting a March 1st deadline to move the legislation forward before the midterms. Joining me now is the CEO of Ripple, Brad Garlinghouse, back with us. Brad, great to see you.
Great to see you.
Thank you so much for being here. So you predicted an 80% chance that this bill is signed by April, saying that clarity is better, and obviously then uncertainty. Tell us where you get that expectation.
Well, I mean, to some degree, you can never predict exactly how Senate and Congress are going to act, but
Unless you're in the prediction markets.
that's too.
Yes, talk about it.
Look, actually, the prediction markets around this point, around the Clarity Act, spiked because of comments yesterday from Senator Moreno, who's been an advocate
I think it's now 90% it will pass by the end of April. I had said a couple weeks ago, I thought end of April. At the time, people thought that was a little optimistic. There's a meeting today with a lot of leaders on both sides, the crypto and banking, in the White House. Actually, it's in 30 minutes or so. Ripple's chief legal officers representing Team Ripple there. But the White House is pushing. I think that is a big reason why it will get done. It needs to get done for U.S. leadership. President Trump has been a clear leader, put the stake out there that we need the U.S. to be the crypto capital in the world. That's good for U.S. competitiveness, and that leadership from David Sachs and Patrick Witt in the White House have been really critical about this.
So what's the Ripple position in the meeting today?
Our position is very much don't let perfection be the enemy of progress. If no bill that gets to Congress or gets through Congress, no bill's perfect. And I think that they got stalled because I think some in the industry are kind of pushing for something a little bit more perfect. Our view is we need clarity. Ripple has been fortunate. We got sued by the U.S. government and had a federal judge say XRP is not a security. We have clarity.
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
Got that clarity in the Genius Act.
We did get where the stablecoin market got that clarity in the Genius Act. But the industry, the crypto and blockchain industry in the United States, needs the same clarity that Ripple had to fight for in the courts. And I think for this...
That XRP is a security.
The XRP is not a security.
Okay.
And that's what the courts ruled very clearly. And so we were very happy to have that. But the whole industry can't live in limbo. And so our argument is the Clarity Act, it needs to get done for the industry to thrive here in the United States.
Now, how do the rules differ when you're overseen by the CFTC, since the CFTC will oversee non-securities and the SEC will be in charge of securities?
Correct. So if something's a security, you have all kinds of obligations because if you own part of a company, it's a security, then you get dividends, you get right title and interest to governance rules, who you elect to the board of directors. That's not true in the crypto industry. And that's, I think, the false narrative that the Biden administration, the war that the Biden administration waged on crypto ultimately failed in the courts. And I think it was failed the United States, failed the people of the United States. And I think trying to push it into a securities framework that was developed literally 80, almost 100 years ago.
Damn it.
Never made sense. And I think the courts clarified that. And the Clarity Act passed. I think the whole industry can continue to thrive here.
Very good. Meanwhile, we're talking about a pretty good sell-off in prices. Give us the impact on Ripple. I mean, when you see crypto like Bitcoin down, 50% from the highs? Others down 40% from the highs. What's behind it, and how has it impacted Ripple?
Well, I think one of these is what we're talking about right now, the lack of clarity. And I think as the Clarity Act got pushed, stalled in late January, that certainly didn't help. Look, Ripple had a tremendous year in 2025, and we're starting 2026 in a really strong place because there's more interest from CFOs and treasurers and even boards of directors saying, hey, how could we be using these technologies to make our systems more efficient? Stablecoins, to me, are the starting line. That's where it starts. And it gives experimentation of, okay, now I can move my money 24/7. I can move it more inexpensively. And so stablecoins are the starting point, but blockchain and crypto infrastructure can really change payments broadly. We're seeing that from the Treasurer's Office. We're seeing that around what we call prime brokerage services to provide liquidity. And Ripple, probably through some acquisitions we did last year, is in a really strong spot as we start the year. To your point about the crypto markets, XRP has been the best performing major crypto this year. It's down about 20%. ETH, for example, is down about 33%. And I think the more we demonstrate real practical utility using these technologies to solve real problems, the more you're going to see that play out in a positive way.
Let's go back to the acquisitions that Ripple has made, spending $3 billion on acquisitions since 2023. You've expanded into custody, prime brokerage, treasury management, stablecoin payments, also launching a new treasury platform. You continue to scale this up. You had the $1 billion treasury deal aimed at deepening institutional integration. Brad, give us a sense of where the company goes next with all of these businesses now.
So Ripple has been very focused on how do we build bridges between what we call traditional finance and decentralized finance or crypto. And those bridges are kind of the core of where our products sit. What we've found in buying a company in the treasury management services business, for example, G-Treasury is the name of the company now called Ripple Treasury. They processed orchestrated about $13 trillion of payments last year. 0 of those payments were crypto-enabled. 0 of those payments were stablecoin-enabled. And again, what we're seeing, they have over 1,000 customers, corporates that are using their technologies. What we're seeing is those treasurers, those CFOs, even the CEOs are pushing. They want to see how these technologies can make their systems unlock capital that's been trapped overseas, for example. So we're seeing that push, and now we have a great suite of solutions to introduce crypto to those. But today, again, there's 0 overlap between the crypto solutions and what G-Treasury had in the past. So it's bringing it together.
So are you expecting more acquisitions then in terms of scaling it further?
We bought two big companies last year, and so the first half of this year is very much on let's pause, integrate. That takes some work. I was actually in Chicago yesterday, where the G-Treasury is headquartered. And, I'm incredibly excited by the direction of travel we're seeing. Both of those acquisitions are way ahead of our forecast when we bought them, so we're very happy with that. But for the time being, we're going to slow down for a minute. We speed up.
But you see, corporate America spend hundreds of billions of dollars trying to adapt to this new world that we're seeing. On a practical level, tell us how things will change in financial services with regard to the digital asset story.
So where Ripple is focused is very much on the corporate customer. And so I'll answer that less from the consumer point of view and more from the corporate, right? So if you're a treasurer and managing, a balance sheet that has hundreds of millions of dollars in different bank accounts around the world and different currencies, even Workday, for example, they had hedged some of their foreign currencies and had a $700 million markdown because they hadn't hedged it. But really, a big piece of Ripple's business now is that CFO dashboard. Give me visibility to all my liquidity, even if it's held in stablecoins, even if it's held in digital assets. Because as we've seen, more and more companies are saying, we want exposure to this asset class on our balance sheet. And so seeing that all in one place, being able to manage payments, being able to hedge risk, understanding liquidity, getting yield, because a lot of these, it's interesting, we see that portfolio and hundreds of billions of dollars are sitting dormant in, a 10 basis point yield account that could do much better.
What did you make of the Clarity Act getting stalled? Because partly you had the folks at Coinbase saying, look, we don't like the language here when it comes to the rewards. Is that the only or main sticking point here? What else needs to be done to get that legislation back on track?
So it is definitely the main sticking point, and I think you saw the vast majority of the crypto industry kind of leaning in and saying, hey, well, this may not be perfect. This is a major step forward, and we need that clarity. I do think, the way I think about it, to back up, we need a level playing field for both sides. You've seen the CEO of Goldman Sachs, David Solomon, come out and kind of as an advocate for the Clarity Act, because Goldman Sachs wants that same level playing field to compete with potentially crypto companies. I love that. That means the traditional financial industry is coming into the crypto industry more and more, and they want to make sure for them to compete, they have those clear rules of the road.
Very different than what you saw, for example, from JP Morgan a couple of years ago.
The tides have changed significantly. And yes, Jamie Dimon has gone from saying very negative things to saying some pretty constructive things. I think as you zoom out and look over the next 10 years, that's going to continue.
Wow, a real changing backdrop here for finance. Brad, great to have you this morning.
Great to see you.
Thank you so much, Brad Garlinghouse from Ripple. Stay with us. We'll be right back.